Good evening. It's another book review, like 6 months later yay for that. So I was trying to find how I could like make a video, any options to like upload or like do a live. So I was like, live sounds good. So we're gonna do live tonight. So in the last 6 months, I have read a couple of books. The first one that I read that I mentioned at the end of the last one was The Talisman by Stephen King. I did not take notes on that one. It took me, I'm looking at my list right here. It took me 6 months of various situations that came up that, made me take a little bit longer to read a book. In my defense, to be fair, it was like a 700 and some page book. So, you know, maybe 6 months is appropriate. So I'm not going to spend any more time defending that. I didn't take notes, but basically, if you've never read it, it's a book by Stephen King. I believe it's part of a series from, yes, the Talisman series. So it's it's a really interesting book. I wouldn't have chosen it for myself, which I'm noticing are the books that I'm kind of digging lately are the ones that I didn't choose for myself, somebody else chose for me. So I am down to have somebody pick something for me. So if you would like to pick something, please let me know. Drop it in the comments, send me an email, text me, whatever. And I'm just gonna do a quick I'll probably do like a separate video on that one, just from what I remember. Because this one is solely based on The Last Flight. By the way, if you are not a member of the Book of the Month Club, let me know. I'll send you a referral code. It's super fun. It's like 16 bucks a month. You get to pick like out of X amount of books. I think there's like five a month or whatever. And it's a hardcover book. So it's like a $27 book for like 16 you get to pick. If you want to add on, it's another like 9.99. It's pretty fun. In fact, I think it would be super fun if a bunch of us kind of like picked the same one and then all read it together. Like that'd be cool. Anyway, so this was the one I chose for. Oh, it also said on the back, June, The Last Flight. So I'm gonna get my notes out here. Probably should put on my glasses if I'm gonna read notes now, but you know how that is. All right, so at the beginning, it's talking about this girl. Her name's Claire. She's married to this like politician. He's kind of a jerk. He like abuses her and she's tried to leave him before, which I don't know if you've ever read the Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris, but it has a very similar like setup with the relationship. But anyway, so he abuses her and she's like, "All right, I'm kind of done with this. I need to like move on with my life." So she like has to like subtly decide how to like get away from this guy because like he has a lot of money, he has a lot of power. So she ends up like going to the gym because that's like the only place she can like have time to herself. Which to be honest with you, that's probably going to be the only way that like I will ever be a regular at a gym is if that's the last place I can go. Like let's be real. So I'm like not about to like hit up the gym like by choice. So anyway, so she's at the gym. She ends up like meeting her childhood friend there, Petra, which I think is like a really, I'm probably saying it totally wrong. I'm just gonna say Petra. So she ends up meeting up with this girl, and this girl's like happens to be like her brother's like a some illegal, I don't know, he does some illegal stuff, like maybe drugs. I'm not really sure. But he has like all these like resources at his fingertips to like get like fake passports and fake IDs. So Claire and Petra set up the scenario for Claire to kind of like go on a flight for some fundraiser she's doing and kind of just like disappearing and, like making a new life or whatever. So, yeah, it's let's see. All right, so she goes to the hotel, or she goes to like get up the next morning. She's been saving some money secretly. She's been like gearing up for this big, huge, like, move or whatever, and disappearing. Uh, and turns out, like, last second, her husband, Rory, changes her flight and is sending her somewhere else instead to like Puerto Rico, I think, for some other event. So she wakes up in a panic. She has no way to reach Petra without like, being traced or whatever. So she's like trying to figure out what to do. She ends up getting to the airport to like, and then she panics because she's like, Petra had sent Claire's like hotel that she's supposed to go to in Detroit, I think it is, with the money, the passports, and all the stuff. So her husband Rory ends up going instead, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm panicking, right? I'm panicking because there's like supposed to be a package for Claire with like her passport and her ID and like all this money, and Rory's gonna see it, obviously. So she's panicking, I'm panicking, everybody's freaking out. So she ends up boarding this flight to or she ends up like going to the airport to board her flight to Puerto Rico. So as she's there, she's like, what am I going to do? Maybe I can disappear in Puerto Rico. She doesn't know what to do. She's like she calls Petra. Petra's like, okay, just go. We'll figure it out. So she is like panicking, about to get on the flight. She goes to the bar to have a drink. There's this girl there, and it flips to, so the whole book is kind of written in like Claire's perspective, and then it flip flops to a girl named Eva. So Eva, it doesn't really talk about her story. It's like, and from her perspective, she's looking for Claire, kind of. So she ends up like Eva kind of follows her, and they end up like sitting at the same bar, and Eva sits next to her and is trying to like engage in conversation. Claire's not having it. So Eva is like putting her boarding pass like on the, table, and she like talks, like tells Claire this heartbreaking story about how her husband died, and like she kind of like helped him die because he was like super sick and like miserable. And so like now the police are like questioning her and all of this stuff. So basically she's like trying to get away, and she's like, I kind of just need like a new life, like somebody else's name, blah blah blah. So Eva's kind of like baiting her into like switching. And Claire's like, yep, that's what I want to do. So they end up like sorry, my computer's on like a really rickety stand. Okay. So they end up going to the bathroom. Claire's like, look, we need to change identities. Let's change, like, switch our clothes up. Let's give each other our stuff. And we board each other's flights. So they do all of this. And like, Claire is like dressed in Eva stuff, and she's going to go fly to Berkeley because that's where Eva's from. So she goes to like get on the plane or whatever, and it switches to Eva's like perspective, and Eva's trying to like get on the plane to board to Puerto Rico, Claire's flight, old flight or whatever. She like spills her purse, and so she's bending down, and she's like, well, I guess I don't have to get on this flight. Like she's already scanned in or whatever, and she's about to go through the gates. So she decides like, you know what, I could just start over right now and just walk away. So then it flashes to Claire's perspective. And the majority of the book from there on out, in present moment, is Claire's perspective. It does flip and flop before, like in between Claire's perspective and Eva's, but Eva's is like the months leading up to this scenario. So it's interesting because it goes back in time, but that's only from like Eva's perspective. It's really cool. I really liked that. So anyway, turns out Claire like ends up, getting to Berkeley. She has no way getting hold of Petra. She tried calling Petra's phone number. It's disconnected. She knows nobody. She doesn't know where to go. I'm freaking out because like I'm the sort of person, okay, when you're like playing video games and you're like, no, you're gonna like make a big decision. It's gonna like affect the rest of the game, right? So you like save that crap, right? You save it because like, what if you make the wrong decision? Like if you make the wrong decision, then you can like go back and be like, oh, cool. Like I'll just go back for my save file. Like, no, she's like stranded in this place. She doesn't know anybody. All she has is Eva's personal things. She doesn't know where to go. she decides to go to Eva's apartment. Which, like, I'm gonna be real with you, like, I don't know if I would have done that, but at the same time, like, where else was she gonna go, right? She has, like, a fraction of the amount of money that she had saved up because it's just Eva's money or whatever. And I forgot to say, this is important. On the way back from the airport, she, like, finds out that the flight that was going to Puerto Rico, the one she was supposed to be on, crashed. Everybody's dead. Everybody. Everybody's dead. She was supposed to be on that flight, and my immediate thought is Rory, right? If he has all this money and power and all of this stuff, what if he was in charge of that? So I'm freaking out. I'm already panicking because she has nowhere to go but Eva's place. She doesn't have money. She only has Eva's stuff, blah, blah, blah. She doesn't know anything about Eva. So she's at Eva's apartment and she's like, looking through her stuff or whatever. And it's like picked clean. Like it's like bare as crap, right? So she's like looking around. She's like, uh, you know, like it's very bare. Like there's no evidence that there was like a husband there. And she's like, oh, maybe she's grieving, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I'm trying to like I'm trying to go back and forth because it was like Eva's. So then it flashes to like Eva's story. So Eva turns out used to go to Berkeley. She was like, in the chem lab or whatever. And she ended up getting like this guy, this football player, like talked her into making drugs basically because he's like, hey, you're a great chemist. We could like do this together, whatever. She ends up getting in trouble and then like she can't go to Berkeley anymore. So she doesn't know where else to go. She doesn't have family. She grew up in like an orphanage. So she's like, what do I do? So this is Eva. So there's this guy who approaches her named like Dex. And Dex is like, look, like, I know that you're a chemist. I know that you were making drugs. Here's the thing. I work for a guy named Fish, and he's kind of big in this area. He's very cautious. He's very careful. We could work together, and he's looking for a new chemist. So, like, you can make the drugs. You give half to me. I give it to Fish. We do our stuff with that. And then you have the rest of it to sell yourself. So you can keep 100% of the profits or whatever. So obviously, she's like, well, I don't really have another choice. So yeah, okay, I'll do that. So she makes it out of her house. Yeah. Like she has like this townhome. It's like downstairs behind like a rolling bookshelf or whatever. It's very like, okay. All right. So turns out Eva like ends up like doing really well. She's like making a crap ton of money. She is like, yeah, she kind of has to watch her back and stuff, but like Dex kind of like fills her in on like how to kind of like work the business or whatever. She never meets like the guy in charge, Fish, because she's like, obviously Dex is like, Fish doesn't want people to know him because, it's liability and stuff. And she's like, all right. She doesn't really question it. So turns out there's like a scenario where she almost gets busted because this girl like ends up like trying to buy from her and it's not her usual client. Turns out she's working for like a private investigator and she like found out. So she like gets a hold of Dex. They're both freaking out. Like, and so Dex is like, look, I'll talk to Fish. We'll figure it out. Dex gets a hold of her again and is like, look, Fish doesn't want you to work for like the next foreseeable future till we figure out what's going on with this guy. Just lay low. So Eva's like, okay, I guess I'll lay low. I don't really have an option. So she's laying low and she ends up meeting her neighbor who's like like her mom's age or what, but in her mom's age or whatever. And so they end up like striking up this friendship. They get along really well. Like Liz she's just visiting the neighbor. She's a professor and she's like, hey, let's go do all this stuff together. So they go to baseball games and they go to restaurants and they have like all of this stuff. They're getting along really well. And turns out she has to stop like hanging out with her neighbor because Dex gets a hold of her and is like, look, you can join again. So, like, she decides, all right, so I guess, like, I got to stop hanging out with Liz. And Liz is like, not having it. Like, what's going on with you? Like, are you okay? What's going on? And she's having to hide all the stuff. And she realizes the more she hangs out with Liz, the more questions Liz asks about her private life. And she's getting like freaking out. So, just she decides she's got to kind of like back off away from her. So, flashing back to Claire, Claire doesn't know what to do. She's living in Eva's apartment. She can't get a hold of anybody. She's freaking out. She's going through all of Eva's stuff and realizing that Eva was never married. Like, and all of that stuff that Eva told her at the airport was like a lie. And I'm like, well, I'm glad that you finally figured it out. But anyway, you know the whole time that Eva was like a drug dealer and stuff, and like Claire like didn't know or whatever. So anyway, yeah, so I'm looking at my notes here. Here's the thing. So when Claire decides she's got to like find some way to make money. So she has been like checking like her ex-husband's like email and stuff, and they're like freaking out because they're like looking for remains in the flight that went down or whatever. So turns out like the like FBI or whatever, whoever looks at plane crashes, I don't know what they're called, whatever, the recovery guys or whatever, like find out that like Claire was never like she wasn't on a flight. Like she wasn't in her seat. And so Rory's like, where is she? So they're all freaking out about all of this stuff. Well, turns out like Claire, when she was like with Rory, had this personal assistant named Danielle. Danielle was like always following her, making sure she was like, making her meetings, like tattling on her to Rory all the time. Claire could not stand Danielle. Danielle was like always like did not have her back at all. So like anyway, forgot to put my phone on silent. Anyway, so Danielle ends up uh Claire's phone and is like, "Hey, I know you weren't on the flight. I need you to call me right away. It's an emergency." And so Claire's like, "What? How did Danielle like find out where to find her?" Well, it turns out Danielle's telling her like Rory knows where she's at. So she's like afraid to talk to Danielle. She doesn't know where to go. She's like trying to find a job. She ends up picking up a job as like a caterer or whatever, like just serving. So Danielle's like trying to get a hold of her and she doesn't know what to do. So then it flashes back it flashes back to Eva, right? And so it turns out the private investigator that was like trying to get her in trouble like seeks her out and is like, "Look, I know that you deal drugs. I'm trying to get a hold of your boss and I need your help." And so Eva at this point doesn't really have a lot of options. Like she's in trouble, she could go to jail, she could lose all of her stuff, or like she can get in trouble with like Dex, or Fish or whatever. So turns out the private investigator's like, "Look, like we have photos of you meeting Fish." And I was like, "No way." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "Hey, like this is the guy that like runs your entire corporation." She's looking at it and it's like pictures of her and Dex and it's like all coming together, right? It's like, "Oh my gosh, Dex was in charge the entire time and was just like stringing her along and stuff." Like, oh, I was like, that was like the biggest twist in the book for me personally was like the fact that like this guy had been stringing her along the whole time and acting like a friend and like getting along with her and blah, blah, blah. And turns out he's the guy in charge. Like, I couldn't believe it. So it turns out, let's see here. Looking back. So one of the things that Claire did before she left was get information on Rory about like his ex-wife dying years ago. She has all this information about it. And so she ends up calling like the newscaster and is like, "I want to like I'm still alive. I didn't die in the plane crash. Blah blah blah. I want to like tell on my husband Rory." So she gets like this interview or whatever. And then it flashes back to Eva At this point, Eva's neighbor Liz had moved back home. And so she kind of felt bad at how she left it. They weren't really talking to each other at the end. Eva had completely shut Liz out. And so she's like, "Yeah, I'm going to fly to see you," because she's freaking out about getting in trouble with the private investigator. So she flies to wherever, I don't remember where it was, wherever Liz actually lives. And so she's talking to Liz in the house, and this whole time Liz has been talking about a daughter of hers named Ellie or whatever. So Liz is talking to Eva, and they're sitting in Liz's like kitchen or living room or whatever, and Eva's about to just tell her everything about like her life and the drugs and all of this stuff, and she tells her all of it. And then all of a sudden this like woman, Eva's age, walks in the house. And Liz is like, "Oh, this is my daughter Ellie." And Eva's like, "Okay." So she's kind of like watching the scenario. And Ellie goes, "Oh, like, I don't like to be called that anymore, Mom. I go by Danielle now." And I'm like, "Really? Really? Are you serious that like Eva and Claire are connected by Danielle?" I thought that was the dumbest thing. I was like, "There's no way." Like, I love to be surprised. Love to be surprised. But like it's super hard to pull it off, right? Like I love a good twist, but if you're just gonna like halfway do a twist, like is no, 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 I'm good. I don't like any of that crap. So I was like, okay, so if they're the same Danielle, like this author better do a dang good job of like explaining how the heck all these women are like connected, and it better be freaking good, right? Like it better be so good. Otherwise, I'm just done with this. Like I'll stop like 20 pages before the end if like they're connected by some stupid like coincidence or whatever. So flashes back to Claire. She's, like trying to get Rory in trouble, blah, blah, blah. She's like turning him in and all of this stuff. Then it flashes back to Eva. And it turns out Eva, like Liz pulls Danielle in the kitchen and they're like talking about something private. Danielle's like, "Why is Eva here?" Danielle knows about Eva, knows that she was like neighbors with Liz for a while, blah, 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 blah. Well, so Danielle starts talking about her work. She's like, "I'm sorry, I'm just stressed about work." Like, Rory is doing all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, so she's obviously like Claire and Rory's Danielle, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like listening to this, like, they better connect this good because I'm going to be done. I'm just going to be done. So as they say, like, as Eva's like creeping up to like listen to, like, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? Like, she ends up hearing that, like, that this is a flashback, right? She ends up hearing that Danielle says, "I think Claire's gonna try to run." Like, I think she's gonna I think she's preparing to leave him. And he's such a jerk. And I want to help her, but I don't know how without getting us both in trouble. So it turns out she actually wants to help Claire and is trying to get her out. And I'm just like, what? So flashback to Claire. Claire's like gets a hold of Danielle, and apparently what ended up happening was Danielle was trying to get all this information on Rory to like turn it in and help Claire out. So she ends up like helping her. And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Okay, that's great and good, and I totally like respect that plot twist or whatever." But I'm still waiting to hear how Eva like comes into play with all of this stuff because I'm not buying it. I'm just not buying it. So then Eva's listening to this conversation, like, "I think Claire's gonna run and I want to help her. I don't know what to do." She's gonna be on a flight at the airport, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden it like clicks in Eva's mind, like, "I wonder if I could get her to switch spots with me." Like, because like apparently Dex told her like years ago, the best way to get a fake ID is to like let somebody willingly like give you theirs. And I was like, okay. So then I'm realizing, oh, Eva went to the airport to meet up with Claire to purposefully switch spots with her. And I was like, okay, all right. That was actually pretty good. I have to say, I didn't believe it. I wasn't buying it. And I kind of respected that. So, yeah. that was a pretty good twist. I was thoroughly surprised with that one. I have to say. It got me. It was pretty good. So Claire ends up getting Rory in trouble. Rory goes to jail. She like decides to move to Berkeley or whatever because she loves it on the campus or whatever. She like starts her new life without being a new person, which is kind of what she wanted from the beginning. Now, oh, just one second. I need to grab the book. So it turns out at the end, like you're thinking this whole time, like Claire's all bummed because she thinks she like basically killed Eva, but then there's like a spot in the middle where Eva might actually be alive, right? She might actually not gotten on the plane because that's what she was kind of planning. So at the very end, like the very, very like epilogue, right? I'm like reading the epilogue and it's from Eva's perspective and it's like talking about like she realizes that she's like, made some bad decisions in her life and she wants to start over fresh and like whatever she's done before, she owns up to, but she's going to be a new person this time and she's going to like go to Puerto Rico and like start a new life there and just be like a better version of herself. And like, I'm like, this is good. This is good. I'm like, wait a second. This feels like a setup, right? It's like all these beautiful words about like, you know, she might send Liz a package talking about how she's doing well. Maybe she'll live the life of her dreams. Maybe it's like built from scraps of memory and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh no. Oh no. And it's like building it up, right? And it's like talking about how she makes her way down the jetway, feeling as if she's shredding her old self piece by piece and getting lighter as she gets to the plane. And I was like, no, no way, no way. And she goes to get on she goes to go up the steps, like to the plane. And it says something about she passed outside of the plane for luck. And I'm like, gosh dang it. She got on the flipping flight. So she's on the flight goes down, she died. Right? Like, right as she's like wanting to make her life better, wanting to be a new person, like wanting to like change things for the better, is just done. She's done. And that was the only part that I thought was kind of dumb, to be honest with you. But overall, it was a pretty good book. It was a really easy read. It was only about 300 pages. Finished it in about like 4 or 5 days or something. It was pretty good. I would, now that you know the entire story, you read it for yourself and write your own or conclusions or whatever. I would love to hear a recommendation of what y'all want me to read next. I probably will do a little video on the Talisman, but I didn't take notes, so it'll all be from memory, and that's like 6 months of reading the book. So that's probably not going to go over super well. But the next book that I'm reading right now is called Home Before Dark, and it is also a book in the month club as well book. So I'm pretty stoked about this one. I will be taking notes and doing a review on this one as well. So, if you do want a referral code for book of the month, please let me know. I do have one. If you would like one, and maybe we can, start our own watch party or review, whatever. Thank you for watching my review. Please leave comments down below what you liked about the book if you read it. Questions about whatever. Yeah. So can't wait to see you next when I finish my next one. Thanks for watching in the stream.